Yeah, it's already recording, so just when everyone's ready.
Okay, well, we are session three. I'm joined by Addison and Ben, two very experienced DMs. We all bring a different perspective to DMing, and tonight we are continuing on the video series that's been started kindly on Ben's channel. Tonight we're going to talk about preparation, really, preparing to be spontaneous. It's quite a big area, actually. There's a lot to go through in this. But just generally, just as an overview, to help the audience really to start with, we'll start with Addison tonight. What does it mean when we say spontaneity in terms of DMing? How would you encompass that if you could in a sentence or two?
The ability to adapt to player choice and action. That would be my key one. Is the ability to adapt to player choice and action.
Okay, good. That's certainly a part of the spontaneity. For yourself, Ben, how would you put it if you had to try and put it into a quintessential sentence?
It's never letting the game get boring or letting the players think that they're doing a story. Like they should just feel like whatever they can do, that's fine. That's it for me. And every time the action sort of slows down, you can throw a little spanner in the works for everyone.
Okay, excellent. I really appreciate both those answers, and we'll definitely be touching on all of that during spontaneity without a shadow of a doubt. I thought we would we're going to go a little deeper each part, but just to start off, just give me sort of an overview, if I could, with you, Addison, first, about your process. Are you just somebody who is spontaneous without thinking about it, or do you have a process to it? Do you have a thought process behind it? And maybe it may not be much you think about now, but it's there anyway for things that you can lean on if you need them in the heat of the moment. Well, how do you what's your kind of overview process of this?
So admittedly, I'm very player led, so that needs me to be spontaneous. And I like insert like plot points and stuff that I want to accomplish.
Right.
Throughout the story. So I was watching a DM like advice thing, and they described it as having the picture frame but no picture yet. So you have the picture frame, you have what you want to put it in, but then everything in the middle is blank, and you go with it as you move forward. So I quite like that analogy. Like, I have.
So if I had to push you a little bit there, so that we could kind of get a feel for you as a DM, would you say you're literally someone who just goes with the flow, or is there any kind of processes behind it that you can lean on at a pinch? Is there anything you've kind of got, but people might not see, whatever it might be, whether it's a list of rough traits, names, anything that you might need in the height of a spontaneous moment? Do you use anything at all? Is it just really off the cuff?
It's most of the time it's off the cuff. If anything, I might rip something from a show I've seen recently if I'm like really struggling for a name. That's probably about it.
Interesting. Okay, good. All right, that's really good, because that's where I pretty much started as a GM. That's pretty much what I did. I'll talk about that in a moment. Ben, what's your sort of thoughts on do you have a process? And if so, would you be kind enough just to give us kind of a quick overview of what that process is?
I think I kind of prepare all my games so that I can be spontaneous. I'm usually just like plan a bunch of issues for the players to encounter. I never plan solutions.
Okay.
But for stuff like names and stuff, you can just make it up. Like I don't think it really matters all that much unless you're going for like a very specific like world, like Star Wars names. Surprisingly difficult to come up with off the cuff because they need to be just the right level of dumb. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Nice thoughts. Well, I started off very much in the where Addison kind of is as a GM, and then over time, I realised that there are a few home truths to processing this. The spontaneousness comes at kind of a price. So, as much as I felt I was really good at it, one of the things I've learned that's been really valuable is actually examining this process. Because a lot of the time, GMs, what we do is and I did this, is that over a long period of time, I could do it without thinking about it, and that's good and bad in some ways. But having that process means I've got even more stuff that I can lean on. So in my particular case, and I highly recommend this to people who struggle with spontaneity, because obviously I can tell straight away just listening to the both of you, obviously very good at this. It's worth having a list of names because exactly for the reason you just said. I always have a list of backup names. I don't need many, 20 or 30, appropriate to the system or weld. Sometimes you don't need them because, as you say rightly, both of you, you've already kind of there maybe the names are easier because the system just fits well, or maybe it's a game that you really have to think about it. And I think we've all had situations where you kind of fumble in the dark a little, with this. So it's worth knowing. I know that you're operating kind of both from a spontaneous point of view, but do you have any thoughts about how you draw out a personality then of a character? Certainly you've got quick names that you can put together. How do you flesh that character out in that moment, that spontaneous moment? If I can start with you, Ben, what's your kind of thoughts and process behind that? Because we all approach this from very different perspectives, I think.
This is going to make me sound like a genuine crazy person, but...
No, go for it. There's no crazy and spontaneous.
Since university, I've had an hour and a half drive one way and an hour and a half drive the other way to go see my parents, and I would do that a lot because I had a job near there. And my car was pretty crappy, and it didn't have radio, and it the CD player only worked half the time. So I talked to myself a lot as other people.
Right.
So I can kind of just do it now.
Right. So when you're doing this, because I totally understand that, and I'll talk about that in a minute, because it really makes a lot of sense. So when you're doing that, are you naturally kind of just trying different vocal things out as you're doing it, or are there natural characters that come out?
I think, yeah, you definitely, I think the voice and the accent sort of come first, and then there's I think we shouldn't do this as people, but every time you hear someone talk for the first time, you kind of make some snap decisions about that person. And when you do an accent, if you make the same snap decisions about what you think about that accent, then you've got a character.
Okay, good. Yeah, good.
And also thinking about what those snap decisions are and then doing the opposite also is a really interesting character. So that's how I kind of roll.
I've seen you play characters in some of the games that I've run, so I can definitely see the vocal talent that you actually have and the consistency that you bring to that vocal talent, which is a great skill to have. And I can definitely feel the love and the warmth behind those characters, which make them interesting from a GMing point of view to interact with. So I'm sure that works in reverse for a player interacting with yours. Very interesting. I've heard great things about yours too, Addison. Tell us a little bit about that in terms of personality for some of these NPCs and characters that you develop.
So I do not have vocal talent. I'll put that straight out there. I can't do accents to save my life. I've never been able to do it. Yeah. But I've always written as from a kid, and it was part of my degree, fiction and stuff like that. And one of the things that I learned quite quickly is to give characters a core trait and work from that core trait, even if they're only in there for a second, and you kind of dial that up to 11. So a good example I could probably have is in one of my games recently, there was a Verdun called Verde, and she was this really enthusiastic, I'm going to say bomb maker, and a bit over enthusiastic. So that's what I played up.
Demonetized.
That idea of the fact that she was so enthusiastic about everything, life, her work, the people who she was with, the fact that the party had come to see her or that they had appeared, and she was like, "Oh, this is exciting!" Just that genuine enthusiasm, and then I would branch out from there through conversation, and I basically do that with all my NPCs. They have one core emotion that then develops as they interact with multiple people. And you might see the opposite, because obviously having that core emotion also means that if that's dialed up to the 11, when they go to the opposite end of that spectrum, that's probably dialed to 11 as well. So, yeah.
That's perfect. It fits very well. I mean, again, at the beginning, it was very much. There's a kind of a combination between both the styles you have. I kind of take inspiration from. It's hard to explain, but I listen to programs that interest me, and then I kind of find myself sometimes I do a little Ben. Sometimes I do the Ben classic there, where I will go off into a room and I will talk out vocally what that sounds like to myself. I will do that because I want to see if it sounds right to me, and it feels natural to bring that back because a bit of practice never harms. Sometimes with this, I can do it spontaneously, and the way that I do it is kind of take a few pieces from Addison. So the way that you do it spontaneously, I have a list of traits, very much like you said, and I tend to pick 3 out randomly. I don't care if they're complete opposites; it doesn't matter. Just 3 random ones, and then throw at the same moment something in to that particular character and just see if it gels with the players or not. And if it doesn't, it's a spontaneous character. It doesn't matter, but as long as I'm consistent with it. So I find that's quite a good tip for new GMs is have a list of traits, pick 3 out randomly if you want to. If you have to create someone on the fly, and have a go. Try practicing out some voices. Another thing I found useful, I don't know if you've ever used this, but as GMs, obviously, you've got a screen. You probably bring a bag of stuff or books, whatever you bring with you. I often bring a lot of additional props. But one thing I've never told people about some of the additional props is they actually help me get into character quickly. So it is a bit like method acting. So if I want to find a particular voice, I find sometimes having a prop makes it so much easier to find that voice than stumbling, because it's sometimes very hard when you're running multiple characters to find it again. Don't know if you've ever done that before, or it's anything you've ever considered.
I'm lazy, so I pack light. I don't even use a screen anymore because I don't want to pack it.
Yeah.
My main thing is I'm not very artsy or anything like that, but one of the things I do use images. Like I'll have an image of the character, like from, even if it's not exactly what I want, or it's from something that I'm familiar with, like Magic the Gathering or something. I'll have some sort of image for that character in mind, or on the table. So I have like a bunch of images, and I'll pick them out. It's kind of like how they did sidekicks in the D&D Essentials kit. They had like pictures of them on a card, and I kind of do stuff like that.
Fantastic. Well, I mean, both styles work. Whether you don't have to have a voice for GMing to work well, it's just it's a nice to have. I certainly didn't have it at the beginning, and it really is about practice. That's really what it comes down to: practice. But from Ben, it'd be very interested to see if you were trying to say coach Addison to say maybe bring some of those voices out. What kind of tips would you give Addison or any GMs listening in that maybe want to try and push on and maybe find some character voices? What would you recommend?
Listen to like audiobooks of people talking, because they'll often do accents, and then do your best impression of that person. And it won't sound anything like that person, but it might have a similar accent. And then just steal it. Just steal it for something else. Like
I like doing famous people too, because it's more fun, isn't it? You find you're in a Winston Churchill, or you're in a voice, just because even though it may not sound like him, as you say, it could be useful for some other person. That's fine.
Yeah, I think it's probably better if it doesn't sound like him, because then the players are like, "Oh, you've come up with this crazy accent." You're like, "No, I just can't do De Niro. But you can't do it. But this is my character, Bobbert."
What holds you back from trying accents out at this stage of your DMing, if I may ask, Addison? Is there a particular reason you tend to keep away from it? Are you a little bit worried they're not consistent enough, or
they're not consistent? And to be honest with you, they always I don't know what it is about my voice, but my voice, no matter what I do, kind of sounds similar all the time. Like, I think the most I can do with my voice is this, like the Batman like rough thing. But it always sounds like me. Like I don't have the ability to like change my voice, and I get so frustrated with it that I end up dropping it anyway, because I'm like I don't understand. I always sound the same, no matter. Like, I can try and do an American accent, and it still kind of sounds like me, but it just sounds like I'm doing weird vowel sounds. It doesn't actually sound American. It's very very
I
strange.
genuinely, honestly found that if I would really recommend this. It's worth trying. Is just get hold of some kind of prop, because it may sound odd, but it's just once you've got something in your hand, you've got something tentative you can kind of cozy up to. It's amazing how much easier it is to put voices together. I find it really odd. It's like when I put my grey shirt and put the dog collar on to play a vicar. It just comes naturally. I look right for the part. It just seems so correct. It's well worth having a go. And if any GMs out there just stick at it. It is a skill, but if you do find that you're not happy with it, then stick to what you're happiest with. And if that is, I prefer to kind of put the traits together correctly, and I like to build the kind of personality right. That's perfectly fine too, because at the end of the day, really, the players, what they want is consistency, one way or the other, is what they're looking for through their MVC.
Sorry, I'll tell you who is really good at accents. Someone and consistent throughout is Troy. Yeah. Troy, whose game I playing Pokemon, he had a moment like this week, which was pretty action packed, where he was doing a French female accent, which does sound feminine, but then he was doing like a New Zealand bloke as well, and they were talking to each other, and they were distinct and clear. And I think there was only one time where he's ever went like, "Oh, I forgot the accent," and then put it straight back on. He is so good at like accents and voices, even in terms of like language. So he's made up a language before, and you can almost imagine that the accent he puts on is how that language would sound naturally, because of the fact that the sounds and everything that he uses, it's believable. He's so good at it. I'll have to record it at some point and I'll show you.
It'd be brilliant if, obviously, when we do our sort of session 4 and kind of mop up from what we've done, it'd be really great if you could have gone to him and just get some, just for somebody who's obviously very, very skilled at it, to kind of get their thoughts around their method behind it. Because again, all the bits that we can share are very important for everybody. We all come at it from different perspectives. Now, this leads me on to, again, this is all part of spontaneity, and that we really are focusing on the spontaneous parts just for tonight's session. Confidence, mood, and focus. These are 3 key areas here when we talk about spontaneity. Confidence is an interesting word. It's both GM word and the room word for me. It encompasses everything. What do you feel, if I said about confidence, and I'm talking in terms not only, please remember it's in terms of you and the room you're in and the room you're DMing for. How would you describe that? What does that confidence look like if you were a player looking at you, or how would you want that room to feel around you? Addison.
I think confidence is quite intrinsically linked to comfort and feeling comfortable and able to do things. So I want personally to feel comfortable in a situation, and that helps my confidence greatly. And I want the same for my players. I want them to feel comfortable to experiment and do, and able to ask me questions and stuff like that. And I think that might come from like my job as a teacher. Like, we often talk about the fact that kids who are comfortable perform better in a situation. Therefore, I think that kind of bleeds into my DM style. Like, if you're comfortable, I know you'll perform better and you'll have a better time. Whereas if you're like pent up and you don't know and you feel like you're not going to feel as confident. So
do you have a process behind going into a room to be confident? Is there, if for yourself, is there something that you do personally, or is it just that you know yourself enough mood wise that how you feel? Is that important, the feel of how you are? Or
I think there is that, but I also think that sometimes we can't go into a situation and own it 100% of the time. I don't believe that personally, because there are things that we can't leave at the door. Like, we might have had an argument with our missus, or the last session might not have gone completely our way, or we might not feel as confident in that situation. But I do think that one of the things I do personally when I go into a room and I want to make it mine is I set it up and I'm there waiting, like I kind of get there first, so that I feel like so I can acclimatize. Because also with like autistic tendencies, like sometimes being in a new place sets me off anyway, so I have to be like,
I can understand it. So you're there first to kind of steady the nerves in a way, because we all have a certain amount of nerves before we go in anyway. So that also, by being there first, builds a bit of confidence in itself. It gives you a nice base to work on and greet people as they come in, kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. Because that's also that, I think that also helps me build confidence in the fact that if I'm there when people arrive, I get to, talk to them. That helps me relax. Whereas if I was late and I was like, oh, I'm really sorry I'm late, and I just throw all my stuff on the table and get all my stuff out, I've not had that adequate time to prepare.
Absolutely, yeah. I can totally understand that. Okay, well, let's move over to Ben momentarily then. So confidence then, Ben. Talk to me about how important this is and what you do around that particular word. It sounds so obvious for anybody GMing, but it really isn't. I think if we're honest, if we take a step back and think about it for a minute and think about maybe some of the things we've seen or maybe heard of in certain, sometimes games go wrong. It happens to everybody. But confidence is a massive part of this, because you often see how important that is to a GM, having that confidence, and also how it affects, and the room can affect your confidence as well as how you can affect the confidence of the room. How do you feel about that? Or do you ever give it any thought at all?
So I think initially what you need to do is don't start the game first. You need to have that little bit of conversation, make sure everyone's got a drink, everyone's sat down, everyone's ready to play. Because as soon as everyone's ready to play, you can kind of get in the mind space of everyone's here to do the same thing. And I think as much as the story is kind of led by the GM, I think the energy of the room 100% is led by the DM. If you go in there kind of like meek and don't really want to do like the crazy intro or the read the elven runes from the book of Arakash, you kind of have to be the energy that you want to see in the room. So I definitely do like dumb voices that I know are gonna get me ridiculed for a couple days, but I think you need to like sort of bring the energy,
I totally understand that. Yeah, absolutely. I want to kind of come back to a comment that's very interesting made by Addison there about, and it's a great challenge, actually. You said you can't come in leaving all your baggage behind, but you can. And it's difficult. I'm not saying it's not, it's very hard to do, but I've learned it over years for myself. It's my own personal way of doing it, is, as I've always said, and I think I said it back in the first session we spoke about, when I get to that imaginary door frame, or the game is going to start, I make sure there isn't a single bit of baggage on my shoulders. Everything is forgotten about. The focus is that game. The performance is everything to me. And that's how I've always gone in. And the way I've achieved that is not going to work for everybody. So it's the first thing. You have to find your own way of finding confidence. But for me, it has always been about imagining it's the last game and how I want those players to feel. And like anything, and this yourself, Ben, you have highs and lows in games. But generally, what you're looking for over a campaign, particularly a campaign, a one-shot has to end on a really interesting high, no matter what the high. But that campaign has to have that feel that whatever the players do, whatever they go direction they go in, they have to feel the DM's confidence is there. The other part of this is reading the room. I'm really important. This is vital to me, and it's been a real challenge actually in light of COVID-19. It's a real challenge because we're using Discord often. We can't see each other. Sometimes it is theatre of the mind over there. And you don't get the same opportunity to read the room technically in terms of observation, but you have to then use your ears more to pick up on the sound or no sound and what you think is happening with those players around you. It's a very interesting challenge. Do you feel within confidence, do you kind of, the vibe from the room help you both GMs? Is that, Addison, would that be fair to say? Confidence from the room brings out some of the best in you as a GM if the players are upbeat.
Yeah, if atmosphere is massive in most things. I don't think there's a single profession out there or a single type of art that doesn't rely on the atmosphere to inspire it in some sort of way.
Because it is an art form, isn't it? I mean, GMing really is an art form, isn't it? Yeah.
And even as a teacher, like when I go into a room and I see that the atmosphere is tense, I know that I have to do something to get rid of that. So I say something stupid and make myself look old, and they all kind of unite together to realise that the old boomer at the front is all right. He's trying. Whereas sometimes I can just go into a room and I can see that they're all relaxed, and I'm like, okay, we can just get on with it then, sort of thing. And atmosphere is integral to everything. And I've stopped games and stuff like that when I feel like the atmosphere's not gone well. Like when the
We'll talk
atmosphere's
about
not
that in a
good.
second. Yeah, we'll talk about that in a moment. Actually, that's really good. Yeah, I totally agree with both of your stances on that. Both absolutely spot on, to be perfectly honest with you. And I think you've talked over some of the best bits of it, really. So what would you do then? Coming back to Addison straight away. So what would you do if you said you'd stop? So what would you do if you didn't have the attention of the players was out of whack and you didn't feel the confidence in the room was there, or it kind of had dropped a little and significant enough that you've noticed it? What would you do to kind of get things back on track? What would be your tactics to use generally?
Oh, I'm bad. Like people are going to judge me, but like I will drop something like that makes them snap to attention.
Yeah.
And then if that doesn't work, then I will stop the game and go, right, are you okay? Like, have I done something wrong? And I'll have that conversation. And if they need to step away from the table with me and talk about it, well, when we're together, obviously, we'll have it out. But if it's on here and the same thing happens, I might go, right, give it 10 minutes. I'm going to talk to this person in a personal chat and see what their issue is or what's going on. Because yeah, like I said, sometimes people are having a hard time, especially at the moment where job security is not great and stuff like that, and they're not sure what's going on.
Yeah. What if, again, before I go over to Ben, what if it was more, you felt as a GM it was more a question that the focus of the room, the attention of the room, just wasn't there in terms of, the players, it just wasn't right. And you could definitely pick up on it wasn't right, rather than maybe you've picked up on somebody who there is another problem rather than a gaming issue. It's another problem that you've noticed, and maybe that's happened. Sometimes that happens because, like Ben hinted, or talked about, actually not hinted, but talked about clearly about the preamble to the game being important. I do agree with that, because I think where that gives you the opportunity is in that preamble, because people come in and generally the players will talk about their day. I've always found, because if they're comfortable with you, they will talk about the problems, the monkeys on their back, if you will. Things that are going on in their life, the weight that is on their shoulders. And that's their few minutes to unload it, about how crap a day they've had and all the rest of it. I find that's a really helpful way of getting them kind of ready for the gaming session. So you get kind of less of the players that maybe you need to stop and take away from the game and go a little deeper. It does happen, and you raise a great point, because I think moving forward,
oh no,
forward in 2019.
Sorry,
just
go back to the original moving forward, please, Sean. It paused for you.
Yeah, okay. I was just saying moving forward, because Anderson made a great point, that when we look at 2020, we talk about September, October time, maybe when gaming clubs open and people start getting back around the table again. You may see more people who need emotional support more, and that's a very valid point because of what you said. And it may need more bits where you actually have that delicate, which you do, Addison, that delicate kind of like, okay, let's just stop for a moment. Can I just speak to you for a minute here, and let's just go over, and because it may be important moving forward, because people have got bigger weight on their shoulder now than they did before. So it's a really valid point. Ben, how do you feel about that? If you lose, for whatever reason, the players, there's kind of I'll call it an attention loss rather than a focus loss, but something's happened in the room where it's kind of dipped off. What do you normally do to deal with that?
So this is kind of one of the reasons I've moved to home games, because I can control the whole space, especially living on my own in a flat. Like I can turn off all the TVs and everything else. But people kind of know that don't go on your phone during the game. So we don't really have this problem, but I think it's because we do spend like a significant time on the preamble. getting drinks and snacks, and everyone like discusses how their week's been and stuff. So I try to make it so it doesn't happen, but like if everyone's obviously not into the game, like we're all friends. If we don't want to play RPGs tonight, let's break out a board game or a video game or a terrible movie, and we can all sit and chill to that. I think.
Very good. Yeah, very interesting. Yeah, and that again touches nicely on what Addison said. So in that particular situation, which I think is really apt, you've got potentially a player that needs some support, but also equally, if the group for whatever reason isn't up for it that night, you're quite willing to say, okay, let's do something else.
Yeah,
and that's wise. That's absolutely wise, because that's reading the room. Critically, that's reading the room. And if, for example, let's imagine that you did that and that was a great success, whatever you did, whatever game you turned to, everybody had a bit of fun. It's great to come back the next week, but you still felt that there was a problem in the game. Would you then start to consider what the main issue is? Because it's clearly not just a 1 week blip. What would you start to think then at that point if it was more than a week?
So
and people came back. They came back. They voted with their feet to come back. Obviously, they like you as a GM, but something was not right for whatever reason. And I know that's probably not going to happen in your games, because people know clearly, because the way you set up, from remembering everything that you said, you tend to pick games that you want to run. You tend to pick an audience around you that want to be there. And that's probably, you're not really going to encounter this very often. But I'm going to throw the scenario at you that imagine you did. What would you do then?
So I try to get like feedback from my players like as often as possible. Like, what are you enjoying? What are you not enjoying? Like, what would you rather be doing in the campaign? Like, versus what we're currently doing. So
you get a lot of feedback?
I do, yeah. I think some people don't really know what they want, so you get a lot of, oh no, everything's fine. But like when someone gives you like a specific thing, like, oh, I want to spend more time doing RP, then you can like really lean into that, and I think the effects of that are really felt. So as much as you'll just get, yeah, no, it's fine, like I'm having a really good time, like sometimes you won't get that, and those are the times where you will be glad that you asked, because it might be, oh, we want to see what this NPC is up to now, and you were like, oh, I completely forgot that we set up this Tibetan bomb maker. Yeah, he's totally doing this. You know what? Next session he pops up and he needs the players to test out some new vampire killing device he's come up with. I think, yeah, you definitely need to sort of ask players in between sessions to try and kind of avoid this burnout, because it might just be people are kind of over fantasy. Like we played Shadowrun last year, and we got to a nice like ending point. And I was like, "Do you want to play Shadowrun, or should we switch up genre and go do something else?" And they were kind of over Cyberpunk, because Cyberpunk 2077's been delayed again. So we decided to play Forbidden Lands.
Okay, brilliant. I like the answers on both sides. I kind of, a couple of things I would throw in here. The first thing I tend to do is, I'm going to assume if I see a dip in the room, I'm hoping that we've had the preamble, and that's been a success. I'm hoping I've identified any player that's come in that's really got a problem. I'm hoping that is the case. I have to be honest, from all my years of experience, I think it's been a good skill that I tend to have the preamble, and then if I feel something isn't right, I've without really thinking about it, I've often said, before we start, Steve or whoever I'm GMing for, whichever group, let's go outside for a minute. I just want to talk to you about your character, but that's actually really an excuse for me just to make sure that they are okay. And I dig a bit deeper at that point. I find that useful. But if it's more a gaming thing, one of my biggest things to bring the attention back is I like the thumping of the table. That's the thing I remember saying the previous session about my friend Tony, who's a great GM. He would be the first to bang his fist down and create this amazing atmosphere because of the shock. But I quite like, right, let's roll for initiative. I think it's one of the greatest ways out of jail, actually, of any situation where there's a dip in atmosphere, you feel something's wrong, then change it up and try something out to see whether that will help reinvigorate and get really back into it. For that moment, there's that kind of loss that happens sometimes in games.
Yeah, that's what I said. The whole drop something on them. If it is just an attention thing, drop something on them to make them go, oh, need to pay attention, and then they'll hopefully click back in, sort of thing.
Yeah, I love that. We're now beautifully we're kind of now looking kind of at focus really of everything at this point now. So how do you know, Addison, the players are focused? How would you be able to say that somebody's focused? And the truth is, actually, this question is very open ended, because who has the focus? how would you know what focus is? Because it's easy to say, well, it's focus of the story. That's only one part of it. So if I had to kind of quantify for a new GM, how do they know what focus is? Because I actually think it's a really important part of this preparation to be spontaneous. Because you need to know what the focus is if you're going to be spontaneous and you're going to react around it. So could you possibly discuss that word in itself a little bit more about a focus? What does it really mean?
So to me, from a writing standpoint, focus is what you wish the audience to see, and what you want them to be don't use the word you're just defining in the definition. What you want them to see and what you want them to like almost stare at is the best way to put it. Like, this is what you need to look at it. And I think one of the best ways to know that people are focused on what you want them to be is them interacting with it in interesting or intended ways. So, for example, I built a dungeon based on our talks about dungeon crafting and the fact that I'd never really done it before. And one of the things is because it was on like an elemental schism where like fire and ice were like warring together. That means that there's mist because that's what happens. So
the elements combine in an unusual way. I like that.
There's mist. So what that meant was that they all had to do things and they all had to focus on the way to get through this without getting lost, without triggering certain things, because it was an elemental thing. Like, a lot of them have like fire weapons that overactivated, so there was like consequences to them activating their weapons because like the elemental energy flew into them. So if you get them to focus on those things and think about how they get through this, then I think that's a big point. That's how you know that you've succeeded. So they had to hold hands, and they would position themselves on the map so that there was no gaps between them, and that groups could get lost because they would interact with it as they were supposed to. Like, they were focusing on this mist, on this problem, rather than just going, oh, well, I know he's going that way, so I just go that way. They can't see, so they're like, oh, I don't know where he is, so I can't move away from them, sort of thing.
Brilliant. Thank you. Ben, if we have to talk about focus.
Focus, I think, it's very much, if a player's interacting with the thing in... and they've like engaged with it, that's where the focus really is. So be that like an NPC that they're talking to, or the bomb they're defusing, or sometimes they see that the lobby in the Shadowrun Corporation block has a Starbucks, so they decide to get a job at the Starbucks. That happened once. That was an odd one. And that was their plan to break in. They were going to become trusted Starbucks employees. I think you could very obviously quickly see where the focus of the game is going, even if it's somewhere that you didn't expect. And I think that's kind of what makes this medium way more interesting than just playing a video.
Well, I quite like those initial answers. I'm going to break it down a little deeper, and I'm going to ask you some questions on it a little deeper. So if we really look at focus, because it's a big word, you could use it in a million different ways here in GM. There's a lot of different ways you could look at it. You could look at it as the dialogue between PCs that's going on around the table, because while they're having that discussion, the whole focus of the room is probably on them. That's probably what's happening. GM is listening, players are all focused in. It could be the dialogue between a player and the GM running an NPC. That could be where the focus is. It could be the resolution of events, and even dice rolling can be a focus. It could be the focus is on you as a GM because of your descriptiveness about your places, the events that are going on, and the way you're weaving the story. It could be the dialogue between two NPCs, like you talked about with Troy. So he's running two simultaneously, and everybody's buzzing about that because it's been run so well. It could be, strangely, some people, and we've got to remember when we talk about focus, we've got to remember back to the first time we all spoke about the player types. Never lose sight of that in this, because bookkeeping and character progression can be an important focus for some people. It can be detrimental as well, but it can be a very important focus. Rules and arguments can become a focus around your table. Debates over your decision can be a focus around your table. Out of character, off-topic digressions or looking at their phone can be a focus around your table. Dead air, airspace can be a focus. If we break them down a little bit, just to talk about them for a moment, this is really for new GMs and people just thinking about this topic for a moment. What is the best kind of focus between PCs? What are you looking for from the players at that moment when they have the focus, they have the control of the room? What are you looking for from a Madison? And also, as well, just before you answer it, if it went on a little too long, how would you wheel them back in? So imagine they've got the focus. What's good about it? And then if it slightly went a bit too long for your liking, how would you wheel them back in?
So it's good because you hear them and how they perceive how they've engaged with your story. So like they'll talk about aspects of of things that have happened so far and things that are going or what they believe are going to happen and stuff like that. And I think that's really important.
You're seeing the immersion in your game through those interactions.
That's the word I was looking for, the immersion. Like it's good, and it's a good way again to read the room to see if they are immersed enough. However, like you said, it can be detrimental if they start like
say it went on a little too long and you knew that the kind of and it does happen. Sometimes you think that is great, and then you think, hold on a minute, it's been a bit too long and no one else is getting involved. How would you wheel them in?
I would use some sort of device, plot device, NPC, something that means that they need to interact with the rest of the team as well, the rest of the table as well. So it could be the fact that they are they're guarding a caravan, or they're soldiers. Let's just use some a bit different. They're soldiers, and their CO is an NPC, and their CO comes to get them, and it's like, yo, what are you doing here?
Yeah,
like,
so you're bringing another NPC in to break up that flow of conversation and turn the attention somewhere else for that moment to break it up without destroying that immersion.
Yeah, like especially in that soldier example, them being sat around for a long time or standing around talking for a long time can lead to some really interesting interactions with like the rest of the team, where they're like, well, where were you lot then? Like, we're about to go. Why are you two like? Because that also can be quite interesting to see how other players react to that focus as well.
Brilliant.
So yeah.
Okay, so let me not quite give the same question to Ben, because you've covered it very well. Let's just give Ben the next one down, which is if you imagine a conversation between you and a PC, you may be in a character that you're portraying and really enjoying it, and it's going well with a PC. What does well look like? How do you know as a GM that that's working? And then what if you realise yourself, actually, I've gone overboard a little here and I need to wheel this back in? How would you diffuse that moment to include the other players, but also snap the game back into a direction that's going to help improve the overall story flow of what's going on?
I think you very quickly see if it's going well. If that player's obviously having a good time, it's probably harder to do over Discord, but certainly in person, you can see that person's very much engaged, but you also need to see that everyone around the table is also enjoying what's going on. My players like rarely split the party, so it's usually if one player and one NPC are talking, they're either on comms to someone or the whole party's there or something.
Right.
So I try and get like a lot of people involved with conversations with one NPC. But obviously, if that NPC is just like talking on and on and on, that can be like kind of a big problem. But I think the best way...
It can be for new GMs sometimes don't realise that they've gone on a little long. Would you give any advice to anybody that sort of realises maybe they've gone on a little too far? And obviously you'll know you are, because the rest of the players around you are starting to lose focus with you. You'll start to see that in their mannerisms, in the way that they're looking or not looking at you.
I think the easiest way
to kind of snap that?
The easiest way to do that is just have the character also recognise that. Like, if the character's talking to someone, like if you're talking to someone in real life and they're not interested, you stop talking to them. So why would the NPC not also be like, yeah, no, right, go away, I need to do my accounting or whatever. Like, just make your NPC aware that he doesn't, like, no one wants to talk to him anymore. Or make your NPC be the one who's like, no, go away, leave me alone.
Yeah, perfect. So again, it's a simple, quick realization that, you bringing it to a close, but in a productive way. Good. And they're important because these little tips are so super useful. If I move down my little list to Addison next, we talked about resolution of events and dice rolling. Now, these are very interesting, particularly when we talk about focus. There's a positive in this and a huge negative. So if we talked about it just in general, I'll put them together as a group. So resolution of events and dice rolling. What are the kind of positives of that for focus around the table? And then what are the negatives that you see?
So obviously the end result, especially if positive, is exciting, isn't it? Like,
yeah.
And you can ask the players, like, how do you want to do this? How would you do this? And then they give you a brief description, and then you interpret that. And if you show that you've listened to them and include what they wanted, they get even more hyped up about it. They're like, yeah, that sounds awesome. The negatives to that, though, is that sometimes for some people it just becomes about rolling dice, like, right. Completely.
Yeah.
That's all they want to do. They don't want. They want to know if they fail or succeed, and they don't care about the fashion. And when that happens, and especially when they start like going on a bit of a losing streak in terms of what they're doing, they begin to not enjoy themselves because they're like, I'm supposed to be this thief and nothing I'm doing is working. What's the point? They start asking themselves questions.
Interesting.
So I think that what you need to do is you need to what I personally do anyway is I use dice rolls to more along the lines of measure success rather than almost like the degrees of failure and success. I have a scale like that, and then so if it's terrible, then it is terrible, I'm afraid. But like if it's like, let them know that they just failed. Like nobody is harmed if you go, oh well, you were so close, but like this happened, you got distracted, because then they know that there was something that could have been done. Whereas some DMs are quite like no, you failed, and that's it. And you're like, well, was there anything I could have done then? It's something that I learned during my GM journey, of tell them how much they succeeded by and how much they failed by, because then it gives them like their own.
Yes. Yeah, you've touched on a great series of points in that, and I appreciate there's quite a few areas to cover and quite a bit more to go through, and I don't want to bog it down, but I just want to add a little bit in there I really find interesting, which again is, you're right, there are some players who actually do enjoy rolling dice, and that's okay, as long as you've got to remember the other side of the equation, that sometimes the success of a session, particularly for those that have no luck at all, is sometimes you need games where the players say, hey, we didn't roll any dice tonight. That's good too, because it also limits this problem of negative dice rolling or things that go wrong. It's a great way of, if you don't have to use the dice much, of leveling it out. I think after you've been GMing for a while, you kind of know where a dice roll is interesting, like, and where a dice roll is like, it doesn't really matter. So what you're saying is you kind of know before they're rolled what realistically in your mind's eye, you kind of know what's gonna. You got a mind's eye view of it. You know me. I mean, I like to roll everything out in the open, and I agree with you. I think you can quickly work out realistically whether it's a very high chance of probability or actually a very low chance of probability, and you can relay that. I think that's what Addison is saying.
Yeah,
you can make it clear before it begins, like, guys, look, it's a 30-foot jump here. You've got a 4-foot run up. I mean, the odds look slim, but if you feel you want to go for it, there's a chance. You know straight away before you roll that the odds are against you. But I totally get that. That's very interesting. Anything else you wanted to add on it, Ben?
I think, like, you very much need to know that you don't need to roll the dice.
Yeah.
Like, for a whole... If you don't roll the dice, it's fine. Like, especially when you're doing, like, talking manipulation stuff. As a GM, you should take into account their ability scores, but maybe, like, don't make them roll the dice. For stuff like climbing a rope, yeah, sure, there's, like, a chance that your hand would slip. But, like, if you're a 6-foot barbarian who, like does that at the gym every day. Like, no, your character just does the thing. Like, I think it only makes sense to make someone roll the dice if their character would be able to fail at it. Like, a Master Thief pickpocketing some random beggar is obviously not going to need to roll dice for that, because they're just going to do it.
And gain nothing out of the process, probably, other than a rag, which is great. Yeah, I mean, I love that, because it harks back to that classic piece about, whether it's necessary. And that's very important, because it can keep the focus of the room well. So I like that. Okay, back to you, Ben, because we want to cover off this as well. I know that this is a forte of Addison, so it's probably great to throw it at you, Ben, see how you feel about this. So descriptions, people, places, events have a massive power on focus. Obviously, when you've got it, tell us why you've got it. What is it about those things that make people get into the game? And then equally, what is it that can put people right off?
I think you like want evocative words for descriptions, but you don't want a paragraph about every single thing in the room. I tend to just like steal cool words and then like put them in just like you see a glass building and it's like super shiny and very ultra modern, and like you can steal a bunch of words from like books that you're reading and just put them in a string. You don't need to describe like the exact like tint of the windows that's like a teal RGB, like whatever. Like, I think if you just use like a bunch of quick simple words that are quite evocative, like it looks like a steel monolith of concrete, stuff like that is going to help the player in their mind's eye really quickly build an object. And unless it's like something that's like a super relevant detail, like don't include it. Like, just give them some very evocative words. Their mind's eye picture is going to be better than whatever description you've got anyway.
Okay, that's brilliant. I'm going to bring Addison in, because I know this is a strength of yours, because that's your kind of forte. So, tell us a bit about the positives of getting this right. So getting it right about descriptions of people, getting it right about places and events. Obviously, that's going to bring a focus on you as a GM. But what are the real benefits that you find when you get this right? How do you feel it? You know it's right. How do you do that?
So it's almost like gravitas. Like the way you describe something makes the players react to it in a way, like in a certain way. So if you want something to be like this funny place, then you describe it comically and in short, sweet sentences, almost like you're trying to sell it to them. Like, this tavern has a leaky beer tap that you can see that the owner is just furious at because he's losing money, and there is a bar wench who keeps sitting on people's laps. Like, it's funny, it's quick, it's snappy, it's not. But then if I take them to, I think one of the best places I ever did it was basically like a sunken city, and like the fact that it was empty and hollow, and like you could see the flashing of lights, and like I extended the description of that area in order to give it that gravitas and give it that tone and atmosphere. So I think if they respond correctly to your description and the atmosphere that you're setting, then you've done a good job. If they're not, there is that case where there's always that one person who you try and set up a serious situation, because for some reason they don't have the emotional maturity to deal with it. They make a dick joke. Yeah, it's fine. Yeah. You cool, but most of the time, I feel like that's how you know that that's gone well.
Brilliant. I mean, I've got a very true story on this descriptive side of it from a personal point of view, which was when I first started out. You go overboard. That's what I found. I found myself trying to be too descriptive-y. And I went on this great, one of my first ever kind of games I ran, and I went on this fantastic dialogue about, what this location looked like. And I think I just went so overboard. I mean, I think I described the bricks. I mean, I just went mental with it. And I realised after 10, and it was 10 minutes, that when I'd finished and I looked at the players, I thought I'd done a great job. I looked at the players, I noticed that nobody was paying any attention. And I thought, oh God. And then when one player said, yeah, but is there any treasure there? It's like, you go, okay, yeah, I've completely missed this. And I learned that the real strength is in both of what you've said, which is keep your description short, simple, and enough detail which carry the key points of what you need to get across. Everything else, the players can fill in their minds, and that's actually more powerful, perhaps, than your description. Much more powerful in some ways. So great. Okay, we're just going to cover these couple of quickly because there's not a lot to talk on them, but they are important. Is dialogue between NPCs, and we talked about Troy. Probably best if we start with Addison here. Now, Troy did this really well. Now, I got that description, and we know how well he nailed it. What would be the negative, say, if he got it really wrong? What would happen, do you feel, around the time? He's so focused, in this situation, imagine he's so focused on these two NPCs. Naturally, as a GM, that's hard to do, very difficult to do. It's a great skill. But imagine you've got it wrong. So you're so tied up in these two things going on, you may have no clue what's happening at the time while you're putting your energy into this. So what do you see as the negatives if you get it wrong?
Oh, the minute that your NPCs start taking up more time talking between themselves than the players or whatever, then you've gone wrong. You've done goofed because the story is now about them. Like it's not about your players. So what Troy does really well is those NPCs have relationships with our character, and they are usually, if they're talking in a group, we are somewhat involved in that conversation.
Yeah, so it feels invested. It's invested dialogue, right?
Yeah, it's invested. Like, my character likes one of the NPCs that's arguing with the other one, so he stands up and he goes, "No, I'm on this person's side," and another player is on the other person's side. So then we end up getting involved in that as well.
So in that case,
it can go very wrong.
It becomes a positive because everybody's invested in that moment's interlog that's going on, which is really good. How do you feel, Ben? Sorry, I was going to say there's very little. No, it's very rarely that Troy ever makes it that they are the center point anyway, and I think that's very important. Is there anything you wanted to add to that bit, Ben, about the NPC interchange of dialogue or NPC dialogue in general when it's gone well? It's obvious, I guess, but when it's gone badly,
I think Addison really covered the main point of as long as the players are somewhat involved, you're not going to go too badly. If it's you talking to yourself for 10 minutes and the players just have to sit and watch, like that's when it goes badly.
Badly wrong, yeah, absolutely. I've certainly seen a situation, not myself, but I have seen that where it has gone tragically wrong, and you not only lose the mood of the room, but you get a lot of dead air. We'll talk about that. So we come on to, for Ben now, we talk, first off, we talk about bookkeeping and character progression. Actually, for some players, it's quite important. Actually, for the GM in some systems, it's very important as well, because you need a certain level of, I think the word you used is very fair, Addison, when you said maturity. You need a certain level of maturity when you're talking about players that they've got the ability to go away and work on their character. If they need help, they can call out either to yourself or another player. Obviously, when that's done well, it can add a lot to the game. Bookkeeping can add to your game because players can come to you and say, I've calculated this, and this is what we can do, and this is what we can't do, and this is the situation that we've got, and we're going to have to put some focus on that. And equally, character progression then can open up new links that the characters, it can actually add to the whole experience once players get more power, obviously. It can add things, or they can do new things, which can be really great, but equally quite detrimental. How do you feel about those two areas in general, Ben? That's bookkeeping and character progression, both from a good point of view and maybe a negative.
From a good point of view, like a lot of character customization can, and I guess bookkeeping can really get like certain people super invested. But I mean, personally, I kind of don't like most of that stuff. As a GM, definitely if there's a lot of character customization, it's going to put you under a lot of strain. Like my main example here is exotic races, and is it Aarakocra who can fly?
Yes.
You've then got to plan like every session around the fact that one of the players can fly, but none of the other ones can. And also like dark vision can also kind of screw up some stuff. So I think like, because if you only have like one human and then they try to do a stealth mission, it kind of like falls apart because they can't see. It's stuff like, I think you as a GM need to be comfortable with all of the options, or at least know the options that the characters are going to take for it to be a good enough of a benefit that it works in your game. I personally don't want to have to plan around a lot of customization options, so I tend to choose like indie RPGs that are just starting or stuff where the character creation doesn't get that crazy. But I can totally see the investment.
So what you're saying there, which is a very nice point before we go into Addison's view on this, is that you choose the kind of indie RPGs. I don't mean that's the ones that interest you at the moment. That can change. Obviously, that will change. But the reason you like those is because they're probably not simple is not necessarily a bad word in this. It's being simple means that there's not a lot of splat material, a lot of splat books, a lot of extra additional layers. Your focus is very clear, isn't it? Theme and tone is very clear. So that helps you feel with the focus and getting on with the game, and even the storytelling. It just helps because it's a lot quicker. That's really what it is. That's interesting. Nice point. Addison, how do you feel about that? So that's bookkeeping, character progression in general, from a positive.
Bookkeeping is hard because of the fact that there's I've always found that there's two types of bookkeeping. There's the type that is the note taker, like the chronicler, and then there is the resource guy, like the guy who's about resources or girl. Sorry, and I personally am really bad at both. Like as a player, like I'm really bad at managing resources, and I'm really bad at taking notes because I want to be involved in the action. I think when it goes really well, you'll see players taking notes. They will accurately track their money, because that's one thing I do hate as a DM. Like when players turn around to me and go, "How much did I spend?" And I'm like, "I don't do your bank account in real life, mate. Why would I do it in this game?" Like, do you ask me how much you spent at the shop? Because I don't know.
So now this is worrying you, isn't it, as a GM, that wondering, even before you've started the session, now you're already feeling a little pressure because you've now got to see what's gone wrong with this character sheet.
Yeah, so
I kind of think that like money's quite high level though. I think like the bookkeeping where it really gets to problem is like individual arrows and stuff.
No, that I
okay. So you don't like the minutiae book.
Yeah. I'm not really that bothered about arrows. I will admit.
Yeah, interesting. And I think I've become a great believer in the Forbidden Lands approach of having more of an abstract way of dealing with it. It really works. So if you ever get a chance to watch some of Ben's other videos, and I'm sure at later stages he's going to talk more and more of Forbidden Lands. So it's worth finding out a little bit about that because it really helps in this situation. Now we come to the more interesting nitty gritty bits that happen. Okay, rules arguments. Now you go for more rules light approach. I guess that means by definition you would generally see very few, if any, rules arguments. Would that be true to say, Ben?
Yeah, I'm more of a rules as sort of rules as quick decisions at the table, and then we can go back and look in the book and check whatever. Like, I'd rather we just get on with the action than figure out the exact four things that we need to do a grapple. Like, let's just come up with the most logical solution. If it's wrong, we'll check it, and then next time we do a grapple, we'll do it the proper way. But let's just move.
The positives are you can turn a situation that maybe you're being questioned over into a look. We're going to run it this way, and we crack on with it. And I guess your counter argument in that would be that you'll kind of know that if it was absolutely critical, detrimental, that if this failure was to happen, it could cost the player's life. I presume at that point you might pause for a moment just to double check.
I think the only reason we would ever pause and check is if a character is built a certain way that requires them to grapple. Like, if you've got a grappling character, then yeah, we sort of should check the rules. Like, if you've built your character around grappling, yes. But I kind of expect you as the player, if you've built your character around grappling, to really quickly be able to give me a rundown of how grappling works.
So the rules light, because I like that, because the rules light side kind of helps a great deal with rules arguments, because it is very clear and focused, and I like the words you used. What about if we turn to Addison and kind of look at this? Because I know you run a lot of 5th edition. I've run a lot of Pathfinder, and that's a different meaty beast entirely, let me tell you. What about with the positives that can come out of rules arguments? Because there can be some positives, and as well some of the negatives that can come out. And how you handle
it helps with trust, because if you trust each other to make, like Ben said, the best decision at the time, and it just helps you trust each other, and it lets people know that you're going to make mistakes, and you'll rectify them. That you're not some D&D robot that can cite off the rules. And I think that's really important because, and here's where the problem starts. And this is where, as DMs, you have to have the self-awareness. Like some DMs don't like being questioned, and I don't understand why, but they don't. So if you can't admit that in the first instance, that's when things go wrong. Like when you're like there, like, no, this is how this works, and people will tell you like, well, no, and then you're like, no, that is definitely how it works, or we're not doing that because that's dumb, or something like that. You need to build up a trust that if somebody, so for example, if someone tells me I've got a rule wrong, I will literally go, oh, my bad, right, can you tell me the rule for a second? And then if it's seriously affected anything, like say for example, there's been a major outcome disparity in my favor or in the character's favor, that we will quickly and then go back to it, do it, and then play it out as if it just went the other way. If it's now too important and the guys trust me to leave it, we'll leave it. Like, so it is about that, having that trust to go, right, do we really want to fight about this? No? Okay, then I trust what you're saying, you trust what I'm saying, and we'll make the right decision together, sort of thing. I don't know if that's what everybody else does.
Both points are brilliant. I think you've handled this question very, very well, both of you. I do find, arguments come up more in the meatier games because the rules, I tend to run them rules as written, except when I think I see something that is more logical. I maybe an example of something where I could give a very simple D&D example would be one.
Oh,
that was the worst dropout now. Jeez.
I got dropped out. That was really weird. Am I back now?
The worst D&D example was Sean blinking out of existence.
I just dropped out. That's how it goes. I hope they're back. I was just going to give a D&D example. I didn't drop out of the game. I just threw the dice and walked out. It was in the favour of the players, but previously we'd had a debate over a couple of spells, and they're healthy because when you're talking about spells, although they're written fairly well, there is grey area in all spells, so there can be some interesting discussions. And I have no problem with a challenge because I think challenges is healthy. As you said, Addison, it's about building trust with your players. So having a challenge is good as long as it's not too long. Few moments. I don't want it to dragging on because then it's not a discussion; it's a heated debate. And I generally try to err on the side, if I can, of the players first because obviously they're my audience. But if I do feel I'm well within my rights logically to say no, actually, this seems logical to me, that's how I would run it. But the players know this, so they've got the option whether what they want to do. I think that's fair. But a good example in their favour is a very simple one. One time I was playing it was a reasonable level game, 7th, 8th level characters, and they were meeting opponents of equivalent level. And one of the enemy spellcasters cast a web spell on some of the players. But previously, the rogue had got Spider Climb on. And I instantly ruled, because the rogue had Spider Climb and he was unaffected by the web. It's not counted in... There's no mention of this in D&D, but it just, to me, made perfect logical sense. If you've got Spider Climb, you can climb out of the web. That's the way I looked at it. And I thought it was a great call. And everybody liked that. And it became, if you want, canon in all the D&D games I ran thereafter. I've got quite a few examples like that. But it's having that logical, fair approach to when there's a debate. And sometimes you have to stick to your guns. But you kind of know when it's, as Ben kind of hinted at, when it's pretty trivial, let's just run it this way, and we'll worry about whether I'm right or wrong later. It's not so important, really.
And I think anything that the enemies can do, then the players can do, and vice versa should also count. Yeah. So as long as there's that kind of logical consistency throughout the whole game, I think everyone finds it fair, and that's where you get the trust building.
Well, I kind of thought it was very interesting because once I thought of it, I realised it was the first time it ever come up. So I just thought, I'd never thought of it before. So it just seemed logical. So it's just a way. But here we go. We go into the bit you've touched on already, Addison. We'll start with yourself. What about debates when it gets a bit more heated then? So, okay, let's say it's gone beyond rules arguments. We're at a point now where it really is a proper somebody's not happy with something that's happened around the table. Now, it happens from time to time. So how do you handle that? Have you got any experience of it? And what are the good outcomes? I mean, there are obviously big negatives. People would walk away if they weren't happy. They vote with their feet. But let's talk about it from a positive point of view, about winning those players back. How would you go about doing it? So say someone was having a really heated debate with you over a particular reason for whatever it was.
Okay, so I've actually got a really good example of this. So the spell Thunderwave, right? The spell Thunderwave in 5th edition. A lot of people presume that it comes from you, that you're the center point. I learned that is not the case, and it's never been the case. We had a bit of a debate because somebody wanted to use Thunderwave in a way that started like with them at the corner, so they're not involved and not hitting all their friends. I was like, that's not how Thunderwave works. And we kind of got into this into a bit of a heated debate. And I was like, have I got this wrong? Like,
because that's interesting, because that's what debates do, don't they? They get you questioning a little bit of yourself.
Yeah,
that's good. It's good.
And I think it's healthy to question yourself. I think it's quite healthy to tell yourself that maybe you're wrong. So we did stop for a second, and I never raised my voice. I never shouted. I just said, right, okay, we're going to find out. And we found out. We went to a very good resource for those types of things. I have a resource on standby at all times. It's called Sage Advice. I don't know if any of you have heard of it. And I looked at Sage Advice, and it said, Sage Advice says, no, Thunderwave can be positioned as long as you are in contact with that square.
Totally love your thinking on this, and I'll back you 100% by saying this. The thing I like is I particularly focus on this area a lot, where the most debates or arguments that you'd normally get is over abilities or powers. Is normally so. Hence, coming back to Ben about keeping things a little simpler can definitely take away some of this. But I always refer back, like you've done. You've given a great resource. But what I like to do is I like to say, well, actually, I know I'm right in the kindest way. I'm not just saying as GM, because I'll just show you the email I got from Eric Mona, just to show the point. And that kind of ends it then, because they go, oh, yeah, okay. And it's the simplest way of diffusing it, because in that situation, the player can see that it's not you being difficult or awkward or horrible to them. It's just you're trying to be fair. And like you said a moment ago, Ben, for both sides, consistent, both the enemy, the players, and the fairness in the world. And you're not being difficult over this argument. You're just trying to bring it to a close as quickly as you can, fairly.
This is.
What did you have to add to it? Sorry, go ahead, Addison, then we'll bring Ben in.
I was just going to say, and the minute you go, oh, shit, I was wrong. Because that's literally what I said. Oh, shit. Okay, I've been using that spell wrong for ages. That's fine. And you just move on with it, don't you? You don't, you don't...
There's no hard feelings. It's just gone.
If both people can admit when they're wrong, that's fine. So don't get too hung up on it. Sorry.
What did you have to comment? I can see you itching to come in there, Ben.
That is sort of why I add the whole, after the game, we'll look it up and then we'll do whatever the book says. I think as long if you don't want to look at it there and then in the session, it's just very quick to just say, we'll look it up afterwards, we'll just do it this way this one time, and then it kind of eliminates the whole... The purpose of the argument is, oh, we've already decided we'll look it up at a later date because I could be wrong or you could be wrong.
I think when we talk about debates, it's wise to... Because a debate is really almost a heated argument in a way. Can be. And I think it's important to realise the difference. So from a GMing point of view, you're out of control if you can't see what these guys are saying. So if you can't see the common sense in these answers, that means you've overstepped the boundary of what GM should do, and you've lost it. You've read miss now. And equally, if the player, after a rational response from the GM, can't see the GM is actually trying to be as fair as possible and not being awkward, you've also missed the point as well. And you need to really take a sensor check of yourself for a moment and realise you're losing. It's not the GM that's lost your trust. You've lost the trust of not only the GM, but all the players around the table now start to look at you in a different way as a player. It has an impact that big. And the same as GM, obviously, if you go past. So, okay, out of character, off-topic digressions is a huge phrase, but we do see from time to time players' minds wandering around the table. Sometimes this can be a positive, and sometimes it can be a negative. if I can start, I'll give you a positive just to put you kind of into the mode. So sometimes I might be having a discussion with some of the group, and I know the other players are listening because of who they are as players, and they might be looking up things that are helping with the planning stage of the next phase, although they're not directly involved in what's going on.
Dad.
One moment, sorry. Yes, Paige?
We need to turn the internet off, Dad.
Okay, well, we will be bringing it to a close in a moment, all right?
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Sorry about that. Do apologise.
No problem.
Bedtime routine coming. But yeah, so just your thoughts. We'll start with Ben this time. So out of character or off-topic digressions, thoughts around that subject. It may sound simple, but it actually is quite important.
Honestly,
Particularly in line of,
sorry, what were you saying, Sean?
typically in line of focus. It's very important.
I think it really depends on the type of discussion and how long it goes on for. Like, if people have like a little like aside for a few minutes, it's fine. But if as soon as someone gets their phone out to try and show a video, I'm like, can we not right now, please? Or I'll be like, yeah, just post it in the group chat and we'll all watch it later. Like, I think it really depends on exactly the discussion that's going on to whether you need to just be like, guys, this is pretty, this is disrespectful. Because at a certain point it is kind of to everyone else around the table as well.
You can say, I absolutely spot on, because I had an interesting conversation with a friend of mine over, because mobile devices are unfortunately the bane of modern gaming, I think, sometimes. Luckily, 99.9% of the time, I feel most people who come to the table come to want to play to escape the world they're in, which is great. For whatever reasons they come to the table. We've discussed many of them in our talks. But occasionally you get a new player or someone not used to the way you run a table and maybe not familiar with it, and they'll be playing a game on their phone that isn't anything to do with what's going on. And I find that it's off-putting. I'll say that. It's very off-putting. And I don't like that around the table. It's something I stamp down on pretty quick, I've got to be honest. It's one of my pet hates, if I'm honest. I may be wrong for saying it, but that's how I feel about it. I think there are certain things that need to be left away from the gaming table for focus and other people's interest as well. How do you feel about this, Addison?
Oh, that's just a big off. Like I can't, because it's not just disrespect to me. Like if it was just to me, I'd be very much like, you know what, maybe it's me, and I take them and I go, right, what can I do? But like if you're on your phone playing a game, in a game, you're disrespecting everybody's time. Like do what you want with your time, sure, but don't waste mine and other people's, because that you have no right to that. So we had a small issue with that, but the guy was actually really young. It was like a kid who was at our club. I think, Ben, you might have been there at the time.
Yeah.
And he used to like get up and walk around and stuff, and using my background in teaching, I kind of got him more involved, and he was a lot better. But yeah, I can't. No, I can't.
And I totally get that, and that's a bit of DMing. DMing is a little bit of coaching. It's a bit of coaching for sure. And I find the other part to this that's very relevant is that, and I've been thankfully very lucky with this. I generally don't get too many players that start a game that just leave with their feet. They generally want to play, and I feel that's great, and that's good, because hopefully we bring the best out of the players around that table, and we're all happy and enjoying it. I can't stand people who are. I don't mind if real world events get in the way, and you say, "Hey, look, I can't make this week," and generally, 4 or 5 times out of 5 they make it. That's not a problem. But once you're not there one week, not there the next, and then you tell me you're going to come, and I put a lot of energy and effort into you, and then you don't turn up again. That sort of stuff I can't stand either. That annoys me beyond belief in terms of modern day kind of gaming around the table. It's a vested contract of interest. If I'm going to put the energy in, all I ask is you just let me know if you're going to be there. That's it. How do you feel about that part of it as well?
Yeah, fully agree. Like, as long as you tell me like a few days in advance, then we're chill. We're all adults. Yeah. We've all got stuff to do. But if I find out while we're all sat down and we've been waiting for you for 5 minutes, and then we get the text, everyone around the table's kind of like, "What the fuck, man? Like we've been waiting here for minutes."
Yeah, and it's a lot. Isn't it? If you've got 5 players, sorry, Addison, if you've got 5 players, and even if you waited for 5 minutes, you've done the preamble, so most people are settled. That 5 minutes is 25 minutes of time. If you think about it, it's 5 times 5. What if they're 10 minutes late? That's 30 minutes lost. That's 30 minutes of those other people's gaming. That's a lot of time lost because you couldn't, just let us know. That's all I would ever ask of a player. And the same with the GM. I'll never let you down. If I'm going to let you down, I'm going to tell you I'm going to let you down.
Yeah.
But I try to stay true to what I'm going to do. And there are times, where you feel, I really don't want to put tonight on, and there's a difference. And Addison as I know you spoke about this a lot, very, very eloquently, actually, where you spoke about, GMing burnout. We will talk about this in, when we come to our next part a bit. But there's a difference between GM burnout and just not bothering. I mean, there's a big difference. You can be courteous to people and say, look, I need a few weeks out to recharge. I think people understand that GMing is difficult, not easy, and does take a lot out of you. But there's a big difference between just constantly letting people down. Then that becomes detrimental, not only to yourself, but also the other players as well. They lose a lot of trust is lost in that way. Do you kind of agree with that, Addison? Do you want to add anything on that? Do you feel fairly comfortable with that?
No, I feel that that's good. I think one of the things that I did especially with young kids, people at my table, is I encourage them to use their phones as like resource management materials. So for example, I found a really good spellbook app on my phone. So what I did is I told everybody at the D&D club that I run at the school to download the app, because all of them want to cast spells. Why wouldn't you? So you get them to go through and make their spell books. We made all their spell books together, and therefore that's why they're using their phone, and they stopped. And I think that a lot of adults do that naturally anyway. They will use their phone as a resource for the game rather than to have it as like a distraction. Well, that's what I've seen in my time anyway.
Perfect. Well, it brings us to the finals point of tonight. So I apologise if we've gone over a little. I never, we say an hour, but it's never an hour.
Yeah, it's never.
But the last bit is quite interesting. Dead air. Now I need to clarify what dead air really means. So it's kind of the worst thing that can happen, I think, around a table in terms of losing focus. It's the kind of thing I look at it where you as a GM are kind of performing some other task that actually should have been done before the session, or at least, at the very least, as Ben brilliantly said, look, if you're not sure, bloody hell, make it up. Yeah. Dead air can kill a game off. You can lose the player's focus, and it really sucks the energy out of the room. And I think, although at the very beginning of our talks, we spoke about where our beliefs were in terms of what's the most important focus, the game system, the player, or the GM. And as much as, I think generally we could see the value of how important the players are and our own role within that. It's very, very close. It's very close, but there are more players. So we kind of agreed, I think me and Addison primarily, that, we kind of focus more on them. But at the same token, when it comes to energy, the effort and everything else, it's you, the GM. That, if you want to know why games are boring, if you want to know why players aren't interested, it's because you haven't considered the room. And the dead air, you're creating an awful lot of it because you're now scrambling around trying to do some of the things maybe you could have done before the session began. How do you feel about the dead air topic? It's a big one, but we'll start with Addison. How do you feel about it from a positive point of view? So you get up trying to stop any of those things happening, but also a negative point of view when it happened.
I think that dead air is a difficult one because there are some times where you do want people to be a bit awestruck, and that might be an ego thing. Like you want to go,
no,
yes,
that's good. That's actually really good.
I've flexed the creative muscle here.
Yeah, that's dead air. Dead air is a very specific thing. That what you're talking about, which is brilliant because it's very close, but the diametrically opposing. A bit of breathing room for the players to consider the awe. It's perfectly okay.
Dead air is difficult though, and I usually think that dead air occurs because of the fact that players do something that the GM was not expecting in the realm of possibility. And best example I've got is I went to somebody's house with my wife, and she played D&D for the first time. There were 4 of us, and what happened was, the DM hadn't prepped us really well, and we ended up killing each other within the first hour of the game, and we were meant to be there for free. Like,
Okay, happen. Things do happen.
Things do happen. Now, if then there was this dead air of the fact that we just weren't invested anymore because of the fact that we had to do this whole rewind to play again and like have it as a dream and like decide to trust each other even though that was forced and not well executed. That dead air of like not doing it well, it just killed the game. And instead because a few of us had already played the game before, we then started going around looking for like our old characters because he said that they were there. Right. We just went Easter egg hunting because of the fact that we'd had that dead air at the beginning, where he'd let it just explode, implode, whatever, and we just were like, well, what now? Like, so it is really bad.
You give a great give another good example to those that are listening in here, or people who come back and see this video in time. That's where the great Tony, I'll use him here, comes in beautifully, because the moment that happens in a game, I know exactly his response, which is, guys, if you think your characters are dead, the story's only just begun, and this is why. He immediately has a backup plan. He's off and running for the next part of the campaign. And that's the difference, isn't it? Where what I call the thought process, the preparation of somebody who can spin a bad situation into a negative and not lose the room and not lose the air out of the room.
Yeah.
Still keep the energy high. How do you feel about this subject? Finally, Ben, what's your thoughts here on this one?
Dead air is kind of a thing that I like really want to avoid. So I think I don't want to sound like a broken record, but I kind of just make it up and hope it makes sense. I would rather throw a curveball in that everyone's like, wait, what the fuck? Rather than everyone sit at the table and be quiet for 10 minutes. It's either that or you point to a player and you're like, what are you doing? Because then
you're absolutely right. I mean, when I thought about this subject, because again, this is all based, what we've done over these first few sessions of these DM's panel has been about looking back at some of the keynotes that I've made about it, and also the deeper thoughts behind it, because I think it's a great way of learning. And when I came to thinking about Dead Air, I've got 4 key points on it, but one of them is simply called Fake It, which ties in beautifully with what you're saying. I'm a great believer that all great GMs are multitask geniuses. They will throw a voice on while still contemplating in their head what they're going to do. Jesus. We all know as GMs that the players, without a shadow of a doubt, I'm going to write a story. I've got great examples of this. I wrote an 80-page piece in Warhammer Fantasy World about a mausoleum where the players were going to guaranteed get captured. I had this brilliantly scoped out, fantastic place where they were going to be tortured. It was going to be a great example of my genius as a GM. And the players never got there because they escaped the carriage. And there was no way I could hold them in it because of their fantastic plan. And I found myself as a GM admiring them, but at the same time realizing I'd done all that work and what I'd planned for the whole session was gone. Did I let the players know that? I just carried on, and that's the difference. You've got to have a thought if it goes wrong. What's the backup? What do you do if this happens? Players will never do whatever you want them to. So your prep is important. Now, it might not be physical writing out streams of notes. That's great if you're a note taker. That's brilliant. I applaud you. I tend to keep things simple. I have flow charts. I keep them very simple. That's all I need. But I like to do deeper thought process. My mind is more about, okay, this is the idea, but if that doesn't work, what could we do? And I always rely on what I call my library or bastion of books. Have all those stories and ideas in your head, and even if they're not going to be used today, maybe it will be useful another time, and this might be that moment because Dead Air has arrived. So that's really covers off for me Dead Air. Now, all that leaves me to say tonight, thank you guys for taking part again in DM's panel 3. We will be back again in a couple of weeks' time, but it's the final thing on this is very simple. At the end of the day, no matter what we've discussed, I keep bringing people back to rule 0 here. Look, if you're having fun at your table and no one is complaining, no matter what game you're running, I don't care how extreme it is, roleplay tiddlywinks if that's what you're into, fantastic. Do not let anybody tell you it's wrong. However, if you can take a deeper look at yourself as a GM and realize as players come and leave and as time goes along, you have to constantly censor check, because what worked a year or two before doesn't necessarily work 2 years in the future. So you've got to constantly keep looking if you really want to become an excellent GM. And I'm in the company of some very good ones. That's pretty clear to me. So thank you guys for taking part in Ben's channel. Really appreciate that. Please plug away, Ben. It's your channel.
We'll start with Addison. You do your plugs first.
So the Pod of Many Things is back. We do have to do a bit of re-recording, and we're changing up the method in which we're doing it. But Pod of Many Things is back. We are alive. We're recording tomorrow, so hopefully that should be out by the weekend.
Well worth checking out. If you haven't had a chance to do so, I highly recommend it. It's a really good listen.
It's a really good podcast.
As a bit of a thing for you, Ben, basically we're talking about the changes that are not just happening with our podcast, but with tabletop role-playing games as a whole, as an industry, and as experience with the COVID-19 outbreak. So
yeah, it's been a lot of change. It's a very good point. Maybe we'll cover a bit of that off in session 4 about some of the changes moving forward. Ben?
I'll pop a link in the description to your podcast.
Thank you.
Right, Sean, you got anything to plug this week? Because last time you appeared.
I tend not to plug anything except the following. As always, reach out, make contact. If you don't know how to get hold of us, we're very easy to find on all different mediums. A lot of you know we're out there. If you want to ask Ben, I'm sure he'll point you in the right direction. If you need more personal coaching or anything at all, just come and ask. We are always do it and help anybody that reaches out. You
GM'd a live stream recently, right?
Yeah, I did. Reservoir docs, for some real nice friends of mine in America, Lee and his lovely wife and their friends. And we also had the Aussie Gamer took part. He's a very, very professional DM who was playing as one of the players. Seemed to go very well. Had great feedback from that.
I'll whack a link to that if I can find the VOD.
I really appreciate that. Yeah, thanks very much. It was a real good bit of fun to do for them, and it seemed to be a lot of fun the conclusion was brilliant.
And on this channel, something next week. Maybe Knights Black Agents review, maybe a different game review, maybe another video. Something.
Definitely. I look forward to seeing that. Thank you guys for your time, and we'll see you again soon. Thank you, Addison.
Thank you, Sean, for having us.
Thanks, everyone.
No worries.
Bye.
Cheers, guys. Take care.
Cheers.
Bye-bye.